How'd you start your article, Mark?
Well, what happened was I had a plant manager who said, if we investigate every incident, all we do is investigate incidents. And I thought, well, that's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what he said next was even more insightful. What I really need is a tool to prioritize my crises. And if you're in that kind of mode, you're in a firefighting mode. All you're doing is saying, what's the next crisis I got to go to? And put out the fire. And you're not really fixing things. So you're just going to keep having fire after fire after fire.
So that's our topic for this week's TapRooT Podcast is fire after fire. How do we go from firefighting to prevention? I'm joined with Mark and Amy. And I think this is an extremely important topic. I remember, and it was because you used to have in the old, I guess it was the green book, and maybe in the black book too, the old black book, you used to have the first chapter being about the 3 different management visions. And it's now in TapRooT Book 1. But the second vision, you had blame vision, and the second vision was crisis.
Crisis vision, which is firefighting.
And that story always stuck with me of the vision of crisis, because when I went into manufacturing, I remember the plant that I worked at, and the ops manager, I had like my first couple weeks there, and the ops manager sat me down and was talking with me, and he said, "Oh, what do you think of our andon system?" Which was, they were big and hot on because they had just kind of rolled it out.
And what is an andon system?
Andon system is essentially when you have a problem, you push a button and it sends up a burp, burp, burp alarm of some kind, and it gets attention in engineering, resources, quality. People basically come running and
fight fires.
And it's a formal process for manufacturing. But I kind of told him, he's like, well, it's a great system, but it's really just a firefighting system. It's not really a good root cause system in fixing problems. And their process was very much, we had these and then we reported out on what we found and we got the line back running. So, most of the time it was hitting some quality thing or a problem with run rate. And then we got that fixed and we were back to normal. And so that was, and he sat there after I said that. He was like, you're right, it is. But they were still pretty proud of it. And it was effective. It did improve. I think it was like a 20% improvement in productivity in the plant. So it has its, it has a value.
When you're bad, you can always go up.
Yeah. Well, it's not just, things happen in operations. And so having a good system for getting resources is important.
But wouldn't having a good system to prevent the problems to start with be even better?
That would be the ideal. And so that was one of the things is if you look at like a manufacturing journey for lean, they were really good at getting started with problem identification. We have correctly identified and got resources there quickly. What there was a struggle with was actually the prevention side, and how do we actually learn from this, fix this problem, and get it where it's not reoccurring. And I always felt that the lean manufacturing methods really did focus more on the firefighting side than it did the prevention side from that.
You always see when a company has good processes that are repeatable by people, then you're going to have less of those fires. Company I worked for had a process, a day's work in a day, and you would see that if companies were following that process and got their day's work in a day done, that work flowed and you had less problems and you weren't always constantly in firefighting mode. Very important to have those good processes behind the work that are repeatable and trainable.
How often do people not get their day's work done in a day?
It depends. It would depend on the company and the company culture. Management really sets that tone. There are some companies where they were religious about getting their day's work in a day done, and there are companies that did not. And so depending on what company you're working in and the culture they were in, some companies did and some didn't. And you can imagine the companies that did operated much more smoothly versus ones that did not.
And I think culture is a part of this big portion of this because we look at like what is management focused on, and that was kind of the story with the different visions of management. Was looking, is your management looking for who's to blame? Is your management looking for how do we get this running again? Crisis. And then the other is management looking at opportunity and what are we going to learn from this, and what are we going to change about what we're doing to prevent this from happening again. I think a lot of management recognizes that opportunity, but they don't necessarily give people the skills they need to capitalize on opportunities. And I think that's one of the big weaknesses, even in a good management culture, that they miss that opportunity because they just don't have that skill set to capitalize on opportunity.
So, 2 comments. Number one, if you see really good companies, they're identifying problems and fixing them before incidents happen. One of the guys at the summit said that every time they have they've stop work policies, right? But every time they have a stop work policy, he realized, well, that's really a near miss, because if that guy wouldn't have stopped work, something bad, it could have been a production incident, it could have been a safety incident, it could have been a quality incident, whatever, something bad would have happened. And depending on how bad it was, it could have been an incident or an accident. And so stops works were really an indicator of problems. And they should be, if they would have solved those problems before the guy had to stop work, that would be much superior than having somebody stop work and then try to solve problems.
And that kind of goes to, and we filmed a podcast a couple months back on this one, which was Start When Safe. We kind of had the same thing, which is you have to shift your paradigm on this. It's not, if you're waiting to stop when you're unsafe, that's a problem. You've got your near miss. What your management system really needs to be doing is verifying and validating the safeguards that you need to do the work, having those in place before you start. And that is not okay, guys, let's just get in here and wing this every time we do it, right? You're not going to get this from a pre-job briefing where you just had people do a hazard assessment on the spot. It comes from actually having a really resilient, controlled process for having already identified the hazards for the common work that's being done. And then maybe you have a take 2, but recognizing that those take 2s are they're a last thing before you start, not our take 2s will catch all of our problems. So I think that's one part of it, definitely, is shifting that management paradigm. You said 2 things, though.
Well, that was 2 things in there. But I had another idea, and that is some people say that what we ought to do is look for success in work. So we shouldn't look for the problems, we should look for what's causing success. And I think the assumption there is if you have an absence of an incident, you don't have an incident, that was success. And you could not have an incident because you were lucky this time. That isn't success. That is depending on luck to prevent failures. So I don't think being proactive isn't necessarily looking for good ideas of what people are doing and make sure they continue to do them. Being proactive is much more like what you said, which is you've got good built-in processes, safeguards, whatever you want to call them, that make the work go right, and people know what those are and they're doing them. And in that way, it's not just randomly doing things to make success happen. It's a planned way to make success happen.
And I tie this also to leadership, because I think, again, I've heard a lot of people talk about controls lately and talk about safeguards, and a lot of them is about getting operators aware of them. Well, half the time operators know all the safeguards. They're present. They do the work. But I think oftentimes leadership doesn't really know what safe looks like in their operations. They don't really know the best practices that need to be employed. And I think of it like the Rickover example. If Rickover didn't understand nuclear safety, would he have been as effective?
So here's one that is real firefighting. gosh, how can I say this without telling who it is? Let's just say they had a consultant come in and told them that they had really good performance, but they had really high costs. So what they really needed to do was cut costs, and then they'd have really high performance and really low costs. Now, can't laugh at this. These were
Sorry.
high-priced consultants, right? They paid them a lot of money to come up with this idea.
Oh,
And it does seem humorous, doesn't it? So they decided they had to cut the workforce, because that's one way to save money, right? And so they decided that what they do is they had operators and maintenance people. And what they decided was they could have the operators do maintenance while they were operating stuff, and they could have the maintenance people do operations when they weren't busy maintaining. So we could cut half the people, because, I was going to be twice as productive now. So they did that. And another way they thought they could cut is they had these independent safety people who knows what they did out there, and we could just cut them too. So they cut all of them, because line management should be responsible for safety. So get rid of all those safety folks. Well, what they didn't know was the safety folks did maintenance on the firefighting equipment. And so about 6 months after this change occurred, and everybody was going crazy because they didn't have enough operators to operate or mechanics to mechanic, they realized, hey, this firefighting equipment hasn't been maintained for 6 months. Who's supposed to do that? Well, it's not the maintenance people. We've already got a job. It's not the operations people. Oh, we've already got maintenance jobs. Well, who did that? Well, safety people. They're all gone. Oh, so what we'll do is we'll hire a contractor to do this. So they put that out for bids, and they finally chose somebody to do it. And the day before this accident occurred, the person had come out to a particular, I'll call it facility, and did an inventory of equipment. And then they were going to go back and make a plan. This is now at about the 1 year point. I was going to make a plan for what we had to do for maintenance for all this equipment I just inventoried. The next day, they had a fire. And guess what didn't work?
Firefighting
equipment didn't work. So that was and you sit there and think about that, and you think, well, gosh, why didn't anybody say, well, wait a second, are we paying all these people and they're not doing anything? Why didn't we know that getting rid of half the people was not going to be, why didn't we know, number one, that having the top performing whatever it was in that industry somewhat related to what their costs were, and that if you cut the costs to match the guys who are the lowest performing in the industry, your performance is going to suffer. Why didn't anybody in management ask that question? And why did they go with what the consultant said? To me, it seems like you don't know the basics, and that you don't. Maybe you've got a bean counter in charge who doesn't really know how the facilities work, what the people do. Yeah, maybe you can cut 10% of your workforce and then see yourself suffer a little. But when you make huge changes, it's going to have huge impacts.
So to me, when we talk conservative decision making, one of the things that comes up is this conversation of what does leadership really understand about the decisions they're making. Because they're responsible for the budget, they're responsible for the resources, they're responsible for a lot of the things that influence what plant management does, what operations do, and so they're making decisions on oftentimes lack of the safety knowledge. So
you can't say, I want you to be more safe, but I'm going to cut your budget by 50% and cut your people by 50%, and I want you to do the same amount or more with less people, with less budget, and do it more safely. And why don't you have better quality too?
I remember I was reading a comment on a video, and this person was talking about when their boss did not understand their job as programming. So they're with a startup, and their boss was like, well, I just need you to make YouTube. So just make YouTube. I'm sure you guys can just, and this was like 2012. So this wasn't the current YouTube, but he was like, just make a video platform that we can host our data on and do these things. And oh yeah, you can do that in your spare time. And it's like, they don't realize what goes into some of these things. And I think that's often a fault. I see it less of management that's promoted and more of management that's brought in. So when you're bringing in somebody from an outside business who doesn't really understand what goes into it, I think that can often come in. So, when I brought in different plant managers or ops managers, that was one of the first things was like, hey, the first month is you're going to just be walking the floor. You're going to be learning from people to understand what goes into this process. Because I think that is a dangerous thing to have a plant manager or an ops manager come into a facility, as they probably do because they get promoted from outside. And then they come in with all these ideas how they think they're going to run it. But reality comes in and you go, okay, you can't run it that way because this, and this process. And there's an element of that you have to manage as leaders, but that can also be a detriment. I mean, have you ever had that where somebody, you come into a new location and this is the way we've always done it?
Well, okay, so let's go to another topic on this. Sometimes you get rewarded for being a good firefighter.
Oh, yeah.
That's how these managers come in from other places. They were a good firefighter at the last place they were at, so I'm going to bring them in here, and they're going to, I almost say, create fires so they can fight them, because that's what they're really good at. They're really good at addressing crises.
Yeah, and so if you've got a place that has a bottom performance, well, the problem is management's not firefighting enough. They come in, put a lot of pressure.
Get temporary change.
But they've probably fundamentally changed something and not understood why. And it causes problems down the road if you're
Which
not.
hopefully they'll be gone for, and then they won't be there.
You got your bonus and promotion already. Right?
Yes.
That's the 2 years. If you're always moving every 2 years, you don't ever see the problems you leave behind. And I think that's a tie-in with also organizational memory. People don't know what the last manager did. It's hard nobody transfers all the lessons learned over.
The people on the shop floor know, but they always see it as, oh gosh, here we have another one of these. Okay, I'll survive this too.
Yeah, flavor of the month maybe.
Yeah,
It's a piece to remember for succession planning too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does it very well for leadership succession planning. Most organizations I've talked to, they don't. It's not like you got a binder of here was all the projects we did in the last 5 years.
And why.
And this is what we were doing before, which was a problem. I know at least in my tenure, I saw managers come and go that had ideas that had been tried and failed more than once. And the good ones hear that and go, oh, well, let's do this. What are we going to do different about it then so it won't fail this time? But
well, maybe they should understand the real problem.
Maybe. How would they do that?
Well, a little root cause analysis wouldn't hurt anything, would it? But if you think root cause analysis is 5 whys, then you're probably not doing a good job. You'll go back to firefighting.
So I think a good tie-in with this is how do we actually go from firefighting to opportunity? And I think it does start with you do have to put out fires. If the thing is on fire, that does need to be put out. So I think there is an element of we need to have a quick response, but that response can't be the only thing.
You hope you're not in a situation where you need a system to prioritize your crises. You hope you've got some time, a little bit of time between crises where you can work on improving without a crisis occurring. You hope that's true. If you're in continual crisis, then you've really got a problem, because it's really hard to find the time to work on improvement when all you do is fight fires.
So I can think of a facility. They had put in a system, an andon system, and they had open. They each one would create an investigation, and they had 220 open investigations, and that's a lot to me anyway. Which and
at once.
It's like a facility of 220 people. Like they had enough investigations that everybody could have one.
Maybe what they should do is just stop, until they can get their investigations done, and then they can start back up again. So they don't create any more while they're doing their investigations.
And what they really happened is they had set their key for how frequent it was for what kicked off an investigation too low. So I think part of it is defining when you need to do the investigations. But I mean, we've talked to clients that they don't have many big investigations, but they have lots of medium and small risk, and we're overwhelmed with all these small risks, these small investigations.
Well, it's better than being overwhelmed with fatalities.
That I would agree. I think there is something to say that organizations should recognize when to stop investigating too, and that's a difficult thing to actually assign. Is when are you going to learn something from this? When do you?
Well, that's the whole thing the energy wheel's about, right? You say there's a certain amount of energy below which doesn't make any difference. If a guy, let's get an example, a height one. Yeah. You've got to be working at least, what is it now?
4 feet.
4 feet off the ground. If you're 2 feet off the ground, that's not going to be an incident. But if you're above 4 feet,
that could be a fatality. It'll be an incident. If I fall 2 feet, I could still get injured.
You're going to be hard pressed to get enough energy to kill you. Yeah. You really have to work at it to fall 2 feet and die.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it could be injured, probably not a fatality.
Probably not even injured.
Yeah.
You might have a hole in your pants where your knee hit the floor. But at any rate, that isn't worth investigating. If you have a broken bone or your fatality, that is worth investigating. So if you really aren't doing well and you have to prioritize your crises, the answer is start working on your biggest incidents first, do good analysis, get it done in a timely manner, and work on stop having the big incidents happen. Then as hopefully you get some good corrective actions put in place, effective corrective actions that stop really bad things from happening, you can work your way down and say, okay, now we're ready to go down to another level below that. And eventually what you're going to say is, if you're doing really well, we'll keep adding smaller and smaller things, but we'll add a proactive piece into this where we're going out and looking for problems where there's high risk and trying to prevent those problems from becoming accidents.
You know, we talk in the course like you should be doing an investigation every month. That's just a good general practice. Not necessarily a have to, but it's a good practice to be doing some sort of investigation every month. If you're having...
Are you talking about proactive included in those?
Yes.
Okay.
Any TapRooT, so it could be proactive or reactive.
You should practice doing a root cause analysis every month.
Yes. So if you've got a...
Just to be a good investigator is why we're saying this.
Yes, to be a good investigator. If you've got a lost time every month, well, you know, that's bad, but you should definitely be focusing on those.
If you have a fatality every month, that's even worse.
That would be even worse. So,
but you could have a quality problem. You could have an equipment problem. You don't have to have these be safety issues.
Yeah. So
practice doing root cause analysis.
And that's the thing that people, I don't think, recognize is they're waiting. Oh, my investigation document says I have to do a TapRooT for level 1, which is a fatality, or a level 2 being some sort of severe injury. Yeah. So and we don't have those every month, so I don't use this that much. You know, we have one a year, and you're like, okay, what are your potentials, your precursor investigations? What are your common things? Maybe it's quality that you should be putting this. You've got, we were talking to somebody, they called us a Porsche. You know, the TapRooT system was a Porsche. Of a system, and
I think it was a Ferrari.
Well, I call it a Ferrari, but I remember they called it a Porsche.
Okay.
They said it was a wonderful Porsche, but they were like, we've got the Porsche of investigating, and if you've got this car, you got to be taking it out. You don't want to just leave it in your garage and let it. Right? You need to take it out and actually get a feel for it. And so doing quality investigations or safety now. Or an audit. Proactive auditing can be used. Now, it's a little harder sometimes to set that.
And you target that to where your biggest risks are.
Yeah, and it's harder to set that for something like manufacturing or quality. In quality, it's fairly easy if you've got a defect, if you're making something and you've broken it or it's not to tolerance. That's a good point to do an investigation. But manufacturing productivity numbers can often be very confusing. What's our actual run rate? And how do we know we're behind? that can be a tricky thing to calculate. I remember we had a machining process, and you had a amount of time for setup that was given to set the machine up for the next order, and you had an amount of run rate for the actual job, how much material had to be removed. And we had some standards of that. Well, how do you actually measure that in pounds of chips coming off this product? It was a bit difficult for people, so we had to create a good system to actually say, hey, what is our current run rate to standard?
Let me give you a quality one. This is a company that produced parts made of aluminum for aircraft, and they did 100% quality checks on them, and looking for a defect size. If there was a defect in the casting above a certain size, it went in the scrap bin, got remelted and reproduced again. If it wasn't, it went in the good bin. And sure enough, let's just say it's airline got this part as a spare or as something to fix something with, and they did 100% quality checks with I think it was you look at an X-ray on it and find once again the flaw size, and they found a flaw size that was too big, and they reported it back, and it was quite embarrassing because this is the last thing they're going to do before they use it on the aircraft, and it could have been, if that guy hadn't caught it with his radiography, it could have led to an accident, right? So they went back and instead of saying, how did this happen? Let's fire somebody. They said, well, what happened? They found out what happened was the guy who took it after he threw it in the wrong stack. It was the simple error of it goes in this bin or goes in this bin. He was throwing things in the good bin, and a bad one came out, and he threw it in the good bin.
We've all done that.
So they said, okay, so we had a process that had a check, and one simple human error could cause it to fail. We need to fix that. But they also said, well, how many other quality processes do we have that one single human error could cause that process to fail? And they went out and found dozens of them. If they were depending on a human doing something, and if they made a simple mistake, the process failed. So they found out there wasn't just one process to fix, there were like a dozen processes that needed fixing. And they developed and implemented fixes for all those so that a single human error wouldn't result in a failure of their quality program.
So I know you love when I quote Japanese words from Lean. The term is jidoka, which is building quality into your process. So there's a term for it in Lean. I know that one. And that was like, again, if you had, instead of having this be an inspection where you're looking at, does this meet and does this not, and then I separate it, if you can build it into your process where either the inspection itself separates it or it goes through its own go no go. For example, it's if it's at that tolerance, it slides through. If it's not, it gets stuck.
Gotcha. And those are all good fixes to the process.
Yep.
That's what they needed to develop for the ones where they found it was a human going bad, good, 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 100 times good, one more bad. Now another 50 good, one bad. And all it takes is a guy going, okay, and throws it in the wrong stack if he gets really bored after 100 good, and your process failed. So it wasn't a good process. And if you could, I don't know what they did. I don't remember what the solutions were. If you could make it some kind of an automated feature where it didn't fit through the hole, it went out to the other side, that's great. But something like that has to be invented for each of these to get rid of that one single human failure problem.
Yep. The ability to both detect that it's different and for the process itself
to take action. So the firefighting went away, and instead they did good root cause analysis, and even better, they identified this could be in a generic problem, and they did generic corrective actions and solved a whole, I guess I'll call it a system of causes, rather than just fixing this one and waiting for those other 12 processes to eventually have a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So, best things to do, obviously you have to put out fires, but if that's constantly all that you're doing, you're missing opportunities. and you need to find a way to separate, slow down things so that you can solve problems and take those opportunities for learning, fix your system so you have less fires in the future. If you want to learn how to do that, best thing to do, Amy, what's the best thing to do if you want to learn how to stop firefighting?
Take a course, a 5-day course.
So take a TapRooT 2-day or 5-day. 5 days the best, but 2-day or 5-day, you can check those out in the links below. As always, sign up for a course. We'd love to see you there. We will catch you at the next TapRooT podcast.